Hello, and welcome back to Truth-Based Relationships, the podcast. I'm Juan Andrés, your host. And in this episode, we'll be diving deeper in the sense of co-creation. For me, this is a key aspect of the self-work section, but it's actually also a key base aspect for any relationships to actually function from your truth. And in a very concrete way, from the authentic self-relationships model, we can understand how this approach towards truth in the dimension of mindset is what is letting us let go of the scripts that we usually carry in the morality aspect of the right and wrong, the conditioning and the projection that happens when we believe we have a notion of what is to be the right husband, the right wife, the right friend, the right coworker, and how does someone in that role function? When instead of believing that because someone is in a particular role, like a friend, for example, and we say, you are such a bad friend because you didn't do this or that, we're acting from a mindset from morality. If we actually want to access the mindset towards truth, we are going to be with curiosity and humility exploring, okay, this is what I'm expecting from a friendship, and I want to check if the other person also wants the same things or they have a similar vision. So in a simple way, the co-creation aspect in relationships is the sum of the visions that we carry with ourselves and what are we trying to develop together. So for me, it's a very important opportunity to actually practice the understanding of these three dimensions that we have: the you, the me, and the us. And sometimes we carry with ourselves something individual from what it is the me before becoming us, and you are carrying your own individual aspects of the you before becoming us. So I think when we are developing the us container, you plus me, we need to have a clear understanding of what are we developing together. And we want to have a clear understanding of what are our expectations, what are our visions. And in that sense, also, it's important to go slowly into reviewing what can be the strategies that we are trying to develop to meet our needs. And to describe this a little bit further, I want to tell you that for anything you want, anything that is an idea that you have, let's say, I want to have breakfast with you every day, or I want to have romantic walks on the beach, or I want to play this board game with you. These are all strategies that are trying to meet our needs. As we said before, in the previous episode, when we explore our own individual layers of the self-work section, we understand what are the fears and the wounds that are perpetuating the patterns that are moving us away from our authentic self. In a similar way, these patterns are a strategy to try to meet our needs. But our strategies are not only functioning when we are moving away from our authentic self, but even when we are trying to live honoring this authenticity from our own individual dimension, we are carrying the strategies that are the scripts. And sometimes it can be this imposed sense of morality that we bring into what is the right way to do things. And let's reflect on this a little bit further. Like, where are these strategies coming from? Most likely you have seen this in movies, you have seen this in other people that you see or believe that they are, let's say, in love or having beautiful relationships. And we, in a way, we model ourselves based on what we observe in the world. This is the conditioning we talk about. The conditioning is to understand what are the potential strategies that can help us meet our needs. But in a way, this is a very individual way of functioning in life. And you can develop that in your own lifestyle. But the opportunity when you are with someone else is that you can actually start co-creating. And that means to say, hey, so these are the ideas that I have of what could be a satisfactory relationship. And then we bring them up together to see if that's something that we want to cultivate. And then we assess what strategies we have for us to actually develop something in which we are meeting our needs. So as I was saying before, again, exploring the needs are the individual aspects we need to know before we enter co-creation. And I think one of the most important and actually first elements that you need to develop when you are studying co-creation is actually the notion that you believe in co-creation. Because a lot of the relationships we live are based on a default state of things. We hang out with people for a few days or weeks, and then we call them friends. And then we believe we are already friends, and we introduce them as friends. But I think I was saying this example before. We may not necessarily have asked for consent to call them a friend, or even checked if we are sharing a similar definition of what friend stands for, and why are we there, and why do we want to have this kind of relationship, and what does that mean? So you see, when we start developing co-creation, we are already stepping on a base in which we both believe that co-creation is possible. So as I was saying before, this is the first thing you need to check. Check if the other person believes in co-creation. You can say, hey, I want to know, what are your ideas about this? Do you believe that relationships are including growth, or are about checking with each other? How are we feeling about things? And maybe we can define together what kind of relationship we want to develop. So all these things are part of the co-creation, and they are developed by communicating and getting to know each other better and better. And in this moment of co-creation, we will, as I was saying before, realize what kind of needs are we trying to meet. And through the co-creation, we will see actually in the interaction and in the relationship per se, we're going to see how much these needs are going to be met. And this is actually something that we can constantly come back to the common space and checking with these reality checks that I've been mentioning to see, okay, how is it actually working? How much am I getting my needs met by what we are sharing, and how much it feels compatible? If for someone says, having walks together is something very important for me, and the other person says, well, I don't really like to walk with people, I like to walk on my own. And then maybe that feels like an obstacle, or it feels like a lack of compatibility. And it can be eventually, but you can always deconstruct that strategy of walking together into what is the need of that, the need behind that strategy. So then we can see, okay, well, I like to do that because I feel connected with you. I feel doing something in the world with you. It feels like being together, having a sense of shared reality, and feeling connection in a way that we are also connected, let's say, with nature or with other beings. So for the person that doesn't like to walk accompanied, they say, well, actually, I feel all those things, but I'm not used to do that with other people. So then what can be done in these cases is that you allow yourselves to try to see, for example, if the person wants to try walking with the other person, maybe starting in silence, for example, and maybe to see if that feels better. And maybe if for the person that likes it originally or requests it, they will see how they feel also if they are in a position of silence with the other one. So after that, they will have another checking about how was that for you. And maybe for the person that already likes the silence, they say, okay, actually, it was very nice because we were not talking, but I felt your presence and I was able to connect with the nature and whatever was important for me. But for the other person, actually, they said, actually, I didn't feel you that much there because we were not talking. And for me, talking is something important to feel the other person's presence. So you see, so the situations can be changing, and we can see constantly what is what we need. And at the end of the day, maybe you can say, okay, so maybe walking together is not something we are really compatible in, to do as an activity. Or maybe it is. So you will see what is happening with that. And for example, if it's not something that coming out of compatibility, you can say, okay, what other things can we do in which we meet those needs of connection and presence and being in a surrounded state by other things or beings besides ourselves? And maybe there can be an idea to, go grocery shopping together, to go to a fair, to a Sunday market, who knows? And maybe that's something that is more engaging, that for both of you feels that is a better activity, and maybe you are compatible with that. So this aspect of compatibility is a big part of co-creation. And And it's important to understand because this is the way we assess our commitment. And I want to just express a little bit about this because I think there's a very important distinction in relationships of these two big dimensions. Then one is connection and the other one is commitment. Connection is the way we feel with someone in the present. Is how much you like their presence, how much you feel warm around them, how much you may even love them, or how much attracted you are to them, or how much inspired you are by just being in the present. So all these elements happen in the present and is called connection. And this is actually the core aspect of relationships that we want to maintain over time. And because we want to maintain connection over time, is that we develop what we call commitment. And commitment basically is just strategies to keep the connection alive over time. And this is when actually the compatibility starts applying, because commitment is about the doing. So how do we do life together? Connection is about being. So we are in a space of connection. And then over time, we assess how we do life in a way that we can experience that connection over time. But how can it be experienced over time? Again, it's in the doing, it's in the activities, in the aspects we can share with each other. And this is why compatibility is about how do we do commitment? How do we manifest that connection in the commitment? And this is when, again, the same things I was saying before, again, how compatible are we to cook together, to go on trips together, to walk together, or to have intimacy of different kinds. So this is what is important to assess every time that you want to expand the notion of co-creation. It's about designing it from your vision, but then it will be manifested in the way you experience that commitment. And again, in my perspective, commitment is not a promise you make. It's not something that you describe of how much we want to be together. That's a declaration of the present. So you can say, I want to be with you right here, right now. And if that keeps happening, you can describe a commitment that has happened over a period of time. For me, you can say someone or two people have been committed for X amount of time, but it's different to say they are committed for life, because for me, that's a promise or a contract. Or when people get married, they say, it's like what we see a lot of the time. They sign a contract in which it's basically till death do us apart, but not necessarily everybody meets that commitment or promise in that sense. So I would like to encourage you to keep the aspect of commitment as a descriptive way of how much you experience your connection over the period of time with people. And that can develop certain routines or certain habits, so they can happen in a way that feels stable. And I think that's a big element that we try to get in commitment, that is stability or reliability or predictability even. So those are the things that you design with people. But the important thing of co-creation is that the more you go into it, the more you check in with each other, is something that you constantly assess, then you will not have surprises. It's not like, oh, but you used to do this every day, now you stopped. And then I feel uneasy because you have stopped something. So my fear is connected with, you are not as into me or as connected with me, or I don't feel so important for you. And that's my fear. And then you can give this in reality checks, as I have been saying before. And one example of that could be, again, when you didn't bring me breakfast this last Sunday, as you usually do, I felt sad, I felt disconnected, I felt disappointed and afraid. And the story in my head is that I'm not so important for you anymore. So that's a reality check, as we were saying before. And this is an opportunity for the other person to express how they experience that. And reality checks allow sincere consideration to happen. They allow it. So in this reality check, for example, the other person can realize, oh, I didn't realize that. Thank you for sharing. Remember that when you receive a reality check, you are receiving it as if you were watching a movie. So you connect with the plot, you connect with the characters, you connect with what's happening, but you are not taking responsibility of the other person's feelings. You are taking responsibility of your feelings, meaning, how do I feel when I receive this? And then you realize, wow, yes, I can imagine how disappointing that can be if you felt that I didn't do something that was for you already a habit or something reliable. And maybe for the other person that was giving the breakfast in this case, they felt inspired a couple Sundays in a row. And then the third Sunday, maybe they didn't feel inspired. And they function from this sense of inspiration that is a thing to be explored every day or in every moment. So then it's important to assess if someone is creating an expectation, or let's say a notion of reliability for something that for the other one may not be based on a constant. It's just something that happened in a way that was just frequent. It just happened 2 or 3 Sundays in a row, but it's not necessarily something that changed the way they feel for the other person. And it can just be assessed, because at the bottom line, what we need to know is, in this case, the person that felt afraid that the other person was not caring enough for them anymore, or as much as they would like, they realize, okay, it's not about care, it's not about love, it's not about the generosity even, it's about a different state of the person that is following their own sense of inspiration in every given moment. And maybe the other person was out of their own self, or they were struggling with other things and they were not feeling so inspired. And these are the things that you can keep on talking. Okay, so what happened to you? What's in your life? What's going on? And this is something that can facilitate the understanding of the behavior of someone else. So instead of trying to control people by sticking or trying to make them to stick to some patterns or, again, habits or routines, for me, it's important to just check what's happening. And whenever we feel that something feels off, we just check with them. We do a reality check. And then we allow the other person to express where are they coming from. And the more we do that, we're going to have a better notion of who is the other person. And we are constantly co-creating. So part of this communication and reality checks, you can also include the aspect of creating check-ins. That means to have conversations that are scheduled even, or that you can request, however you prefer. And then, you will sit down and you will check with the other one. Hey, how's your life? What's happening in these different dimensions? And for some people, it's useful to have even like a certain matrix in which they can just have a few areas to cover. Okay, how are things at work? How are things with your, family of origin? How are your things with these friends that you were struggling, or your band, or whatever you're doing? Because sometimes we are expecting the other person to come and be very honest or very sincere, so we know what's happening with them. And then we expect that if they express enough, we would know enough of them, and then we can predict enough what's going to happen. But then if we are doing that, we can be in this aspect of the responsibility, expecting the other people to be responsible of our thoughts and feelings. And we stay in the victim mode, expecting that the other one should do the thing that they're supposed to. Again, supported by the mindset of morality. That's what people should do. If you are struggling with something, you should tell me so I'm aware of what's happening. So even if that can be part of the vision, it's important to take always responsibility of your own thoughts and feelings, which means that any sense of co-creation you develop, anything that can happen away from what you have envisioned together, that you have the freedom, the encouragement, and also part of the co-creation aspects, that is to take responsibility of your thoughts and feelings and ask and have a reality check, do a check-in with the other person and see how are you feeling about it, and then see how both of you can recreate, or let's say co-create, this new moment in which you can include people feeling differently than what they expected. But I think it's very, very important, again, not to stay in expectations. Even if you develop a whole co-creation with your vision, don't take that as another script. The co-creation is continuous, is dynamic, is flexible. It's about how are we and how are we evolving and changing in our lives, in every day, in every month. We can change. And this is the important thing, that we need to share that vision. Do you believe that we are dynamic beings? Yes or no? Does anybody believe that we function like machines and we have to be predictable and we have to incorporate whatever we hear and then apply it? It's very interesting how people sometimes function in this sense of, I told you so, you don't listen, and people expect that because they mention what their preference is, if the other person would really care for them, They would have incorporated that statement, they would apply it to all of their behavior, and they will always be, consequent with that request in a way. And we don't function like that, especially if we hear things new. I can care very much about someone. And if they tell me, I really like when, a very simple thing, even like when you massage me, that you do it in this intensity or in this point of my back, for example. And this is something that I can listen, I can understand, I can do it after they told me. But maybe if I spontaneously offer a massage, I may not remember what they told me the last time. Maybe it happened a couple of weeks before. And then the other person is waiting for me to just do what they told me 2 weeks before. And they're feeling very disappointed because they don't feel that they matter. And I'm doing the massage in the most natural, spontaneous way that happens. And maybe I have forgotten about what they said. So for me, this is very important, again, to not take responsibility of the other person's feelings and take responsibility of ours. If we don't are expecting other people to be responsible of our feelings, we will not be in the expectation. We will actually be in the proactive sense of, I'm not liking this. Can you please do it like this thing that I told you before? I can repeat it now. It's like this and that. And even with mechanical things can be even easier. It can be even harder sometimes when we say, okay, so when you tell me how you feel, I need you to say it in I statements and not to generalize things, because I feel like you're not owning what you are feeling, for example. And that's a wish. Again, even saying I need you to, it can be slightly demanding, but I'm just giving you examples that are realistic. So you can always rephrase and see what kind of language and communication you want to use. But even then, even if it's a proper request, you can try to apply that, but it may not be applied at the same time. So like every time, I mean, and this is important to believe that, okay, I shouldn't take this personally. I shouldn't expect the other person to be responsible of my feelings, in the sense of they are doing the best they can. And this is the part of the co-creation also, of sharing these beliefs. Do we believe that we want to do the best for each other all the time? Yes. Do we believe that we are trying to harm the other one intentionally anytime? No. But why do we react sometimes as if they would be doing that? You see, so we get into reactive modes because we distrust the intention of the other person. But somehow our belief is that they want the best for us. So this is something very important that we need to start connecting with. That is the element of boundaries. Okay, and boundaries comes when you need to establish a limit of what is enough for you, because you cannot continue in that in a safe manner. So in simple terms, for me, boundaries are, again, commitments to yourself. They are not limits you impose on other people. And we were sharing a bit already about this in previous episodes. And for me, the important thing of boundaries is that we need to believe first that boundaries are something we do. This is part of the co-creation. Do we believe that boundaries are needed? Do we believe that we all need sometimes to state boundary, and that is not a personal thing against the other one? So the more we go into that, we have a notion that believes that boundaries are a needed and wanted thing to happen. I also call boundaries an act of love, because it's actually avoiding us to be nasty with each other. So the more you go into that and you state the boundary, you can realize that when someone is actually acting from a space of being triggered, a space from a wound, and they are becoming defensive or in the victim mode, that is connected with either, again, imposing a mindset of morality, or again, taking responsibility of your feelings and defending themselves, or expecting you to be responsible of their feelings and then being demanding in this different way and maybe passive aggressive. So if you receive any of these behaviors and for you it doesn't feel safe, it's your responsibility to take space, to enact a boundary. And that means you disengage from the situation that feels unsafe. So a boundary, again, is a commitment with yourself. That I would say the ultimate boundary is usually, I don't do things that make me feel unsafe, or let's say in which I don't feel safe. I don't do them. I don't keep engaging in a situation that is taking me to a place in which I don't feel safe. This is the baseline. And then I can say, okay, For example, if someone is, again, speaking in a way that for me is highly demanding, that is highly projecting, and for me it feels that they're not taking responsibility of their own thoughts and feelings, and that doesn't feel a communication that I want to lean into, I have two options. I can have an attempt of communicating, or let's say requesting rephrasing. So if someone starts acting or communicating in a more violent way or a more demanding way, you can say, would you be able to rephrase that in an I statement? And maybe the other person is not responsible for that. And they can say, how dare you? You are doing this, and blah, blah, blah. And we can go into this more dramatic space. But again, it's your responsibility to realize, okay, this person is not open for co-creation in this moment. They're not open and available to even connect with the things that we believe. And an easier way for me to envision that or to imagine this thing is to just imagine that every time we get triggered and we go into our wounds and we get dysregulated, it's like we become like werewolves. And when we become werewolves, we're not available for a very rational conversation. We cannot understand. We may not be empathetic. So I recommend you, if you see a werewolf, don't engage with the werewolf. Stay away from the werewolf. Make some space from it. And then you can be safe on your own. If you stay with a werewolf, most likely you will turn into a werewolf yourself. So this is very important to notice, because then is when this concept of, again, boundaries being an act of love applies really, because if I stay, I either will be, damaged by you, and you will not feel good about that later on. So I'm avoiding you to be nasty to me, and I don't want to become a werewolf myself because I don't want to be nasty to you. So if we feel it like that, it's going to be easier to just know that it's needed. And we remember that when we were both regulated, we both acknowledge that boundaries are something that is needed, and we encourage the other one to do it. At the same time, it may not be that easy to go into this. And this is especially for people that have some kind of abandonment wounds. And this is something that may be hard to apply. So if you have abandonment wounds, for example, you may be experiencing a difficulty in receiving someone stating a boundary, meaning somebody leaving the room, for example. And I will just repeat this thing briefly, because for me, it's important to express the boundary or express the need of boundaries in a relationship, even before it happens. So ideally, you would say to the other person, sometimes when you speak in a way that I don't feel considered, or that I don't feel included in the way you're communicating, or I feel judged or demanded, I don't feel safe. And I realize that when that happens, I feel my body reacting. I feel anxious. I feel agitated. Some of my limbs start shaking a little bit. And I realize that I'm shortening my breath, and it's just making me feel unsafe and in a very unwanted space. And I realize that I tend to stay in those moments with you because I just feel that it's rude to leave. Again, morality instead of truth. But then I realize, and now with the truth, in the curiosity and humility, I realize that if I don't leave, I'm going to keep on self-demanding, meaning I'm staying only out of duty and transaction and self-demand from the heart space. And I am taking responsibility of my thoughts and feelings by removing myself from the situation. So if this happens again, you can say again, I will try my best to tell you to maybe rephrase something or to request something for it to feel safer for me. But I may not even be able to do that. And I may need to leave the situation. So I may just leave. And I'm doing that not against you. It's not personal. It's out of my own self-protection. And now you make the magical question, how would you feel if I did that? And this is very important to consider the other person. So then it's part of the co-creation again. And then you say, well, yeah, it can be tough for me, but I understand that it may be needed. And then you also encourage them. Do you think that you sometimes need to state boundaries for me? If I do something that for you makes you feel upset or unsafe. So then we encourage this act of enacting boundaries. And it's part of our vision in the co-creation. Now I want to come back to what happens when it feels very unsafe to actually receive someone leaving. We are discussing, we are activating our wounds, we're feeling triggered, and suddenly someone leaves. That can be very triggering. So even though if we believe that that's part of our vision in the co-creation of our relationship, I believe that this is something that can be supported by a common work. And this is to work a little bit with sign language. And this would be to create a strategy that would make a sense of safety that stays even when somebody leaves. And this is connected with creating some sense of, again, sign language. It can be you touching your face or tapping a part of your body, or anything that doesn't necessarily require visual contact. And you will practice this and you will create a conditioning in a way. You will create a pattern, a habit in which every day for a while, until you start applying this automatically, it should be reinforced positively. You will do this, whatever sign or tap on your face or your body. And when you do this, you will tell the other person, I love you, I'm with you, I'm taking time to self-protect, and we'll get through this together. This is not personal, I'm just taking care of myself. And you say something like that while you do the gesture, and you just do that out of practice several days, every day. So then by the time you actually have to state the boundary, when you cannot even rephrase or paraphrase or just request anything, you will just maybe do the sign and then you leave. And this is something that, again, you have to practice both ways. So both people will do this, and you can express it in your own words, but hopefully it's the same message, and again, it's something like, again, I love you, I'm with you, this is not personal, we're going to get through this together. And you just find any ways that message is taken across. You check with them, is this feeling nice? Is this the message that you need to hear? You can check with the other person if they need something else to be included. Again, it shouldn't be more than 2 sentences. So you can repeat that every day. So the moment that you need to state a boundary and you want to leave, you will actually just be able to do the gesture and leave. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be super easy for the person being left alone, but it's going to help not to go into higher dysregulation. And this is why we need to come back to that sense of inner safety. Because this is very important also, we need to understand that survival safety is something that we need to tackle on our own. Okay, and it's not something that we can depend on others. And this is why actually there's a lot of codependency happening, because we are putting our needs of survival on other people. And this is quite subconscious in a way. So I'm just going to describe a little bit of how this functions. And it's about having an understanding that when we were young, when we are toddlers, when we are babies, instinctively, this is as being animals and mammals, we know that if we separate from our caregivers, we may die. So there is this notion of connection with our attachment figure especially, that if we disconnect from our attachment figures, it may feel like we could die. So it means that our whole, again, the sympathetic activation of the peripheral nervous system, this fight or flight mode, gets activated when we feel there's a chance of disconnecting. And this is what gets triggered when we actually are feeling that we can disconnect from people that we love or we're attached to. And this can be, again, highly intensified by when we are feeling in a dysregulated space and we are feeling that our needs are not met and we're not feeling safe already. It's going to get triggered. This whole mechanism is going to get triggered. So we need to realize that if we tend to go into survival mode when there's a chance of disconnection from another person, it means that we need to strengthen our nervous system and develop the understanding, and just is the reminder that we are great at keeping ourselves alive. If you are listening to this podcast, it means you have successfully 100% kept yourself alive your whole life. You have died 0 times in this lifetime, at least, depending on your belief system. But this is something to be recognized. Nobody can teach you how to run away from a tiger or a fire. You know, survival mode happens naturally, but we need to assess when our survival mode gets activated in situations where our life is not actually being threatened. And this is what we can do by doing self-soothing exercises, self-regulation exercises in which you connect with the way to make your body feel relaxed. That is usually connecting with breath and touch, and you can just find self-soothing techniques online. And the more you do that, you can do that 2 minutes, you can do that several times a day to practice, to remember how it feels to be relaxed. You will be dropping the stress of your body, the tension that you pile up even without noticing, and you will realize how good you are by keeping yourself safe in survival, in the moment. It's all about the present. Survival is not about the future, it's about the present. But sometimes we activate the survival mode by thinking about the future. And this is why when we do self-soothing, we have to always come back to the present and feel how much you feel safe in the present. And then you start slowly expanding to see, okay, what else is out there? What else is outside of me? What else is outside this room where I am? So the more you practice that, you will develop a knowledge, a wisdom that you are great at keeping yourself safe. You can do that. You can come back to that anytime. So that's going to build up a stronger sense of self-reliance, and you will not feel that when somebody is leaving you, actually is needed to go into survival mode. And this is the practice you do, but by self-soothing is going to be stimulated by the co-creation you do with others. And then you develop this understanding. You can apply it, actually. You can apply now the understanding that you are together in spite of conflict. And this is actually a core element of trust. And for me, this is something that we experience when we realize that in spite of having an issue between us, in spite of having a conflict between us, we feel that sense of togetherness. So you can apply then, because you can rely on yourself, then you can acknowledge the togetherness in spite of the conflict, because you will not go into that survival mode when you are in a conflict with the other person. And you can self-soothe if that's needed. And you can trust that the co-creation still happens, and you will have a check-in later. You will have a reality check, and you will know, because of what you have co-created with another person, there's going to be continuity in your commitment. And you will always reassess that. And you will reassess the compatibility, and you stay in this together. So even if there's going to be changes in the compatibility, even if there's going to be transitions in the relationship and something is changing, you are doing that together. And this is why it's so important, because it's about the connection that stays there. It's not so much on the commitment stay in the same way. So the togetherness in spite of conflict is to say, hey, we still have our connection. And that connection feels present when you acknowledge that, regardless of the ways that you live that in commitment. We go away from the strategies and the ideas that we have on how it's supposed to be, again, away from the mindset of morality. And we connect much more with the mindset towards truth, in which we realize, we have what we need in this moment. And we're going to see what happens later on when what's happening is not actually what we want. And that's the grieving we do to accept unwanted reality. But that's coming on the next episode. We're going to leave it here for now. Thank you very much for listening. And this is Truth-Based Relationships, the podcast. And we'll talk again in another episode.